All right, today we're talking about how to never lose an employee again. If you are an employer, if you've hired anyone, if you have people working for you right now, you're probably petrified about your good people leaving. So we're going to talk about how to prevent that from happening. My guest today is Joey Coleman. He's an author of a book, Never Lose an Employee Again. And I'll tell you all about them in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And every week I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, authors, entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies, ranging from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. Check out the archives. Lots of great episodes there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help companies to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn more about what we do at rise25.com. And I'm excited here today. First of all, I want to give a shout out to an old friend, Jason Gaynard of Mastermind Talks, who first introduced me to our guest here today. But we have a special connection from our past, which I'll tell you about in a second. My guest is Joey Coleman. He's an award-winning speaker, specializes in customer and employee retention. This is my second time interviewing Joey. He's always a lot of fun. And previously, we talked about his previous book, which was about how to never lose a customer again. But now we're going to talk about how he's applied that first 100 days methodology, which is what he's been speaking and training on for many years, to the world of employees. So we're going to talk all about that. And here's the fun fact is that Joey and I discovered, first we meet at a business conference, Mastermind Talks, but we discovered that we're both former practicing attorneys, and we both are in the very small universe of people who actually worked in the same White House during the Clinton years. Joey in the counsel's office, so he's a little bit more qualified than I was. But really interesting, fun guy, and speaks all over the globe. So it's got really interesting stories to come from. But Joey, first of all, I want to ask you about how you decided to take your methodology, which you'd been training, speaking on all these years on stages, but applying it to clients and customers, and how you decided that I'm going to turn this and I'm going to apply these concepts, this framework, to helping employers to keep their employees.
Oh, well, John, first of all, thanks so much for having me back on the show. And thanks for the kind words of introduction. It is always a pleasure to get a chance to hang out with you and chat. And yes, the stories we could tell about our times during the Clinton administration, super exciting to say the least. But, it's interesting. You're right. I've been in the customer experience space for over 20 years. And I was about 5 minutes into my journey as a customer experience person when I realized that you can't have a great customer experience without having great employees to deliver that experience. The challenge, I think, is in most organizations, they treat customer experience and employee experience as two very different things. Even though I would posit they are inextricably linked to each other, most organizations, at least structurally, don't approach them the same way. So while I was doing all of this work on the customer side, and I knew that employee experience was important, it didn't rise to the same level on my radar screen until after my first book came out. And a couple months after that, I got an email from a reader. And all the email said was, "Dear Joey, if you wrote a book called Never Lose an Employee Again, I would buy it." That was it. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And it kind of caught me off guard. And I responded to the person, "Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that." Long story short, I received about half dozen to a dozen more emails exactly like that. No additional context, no additional background. If you wrote a book called Never Lose an Employee Again, I would buy it. Now, I don't know about you, John. I'm not the brightest crayon in the box. And, it took a couple of times before I was like, there might be some interest in this. And so I started to pull on that thread of what employee experience could look like and what the challenges were that employers were having all over the world with engaging their employees, finding great talent, retaining great talent, all these aspects of the employee journey. And the more I dove into it, the more excited I got that there might be something here to work with. And that kind of led to me speaking on the topic. And I always have a tendency to speak about topics before I write about them, just to kind of see what the audience reaction is going to be. And when I started speaking on it, people got really excited and they wanted to learn more. And I was like, all right, there's something here. And that kind of eventually led into the book and to where we are today.
And did you find that now you do a lot of consulting as well, speaking to a lot of different audiences. Did you find that there were a lot of companies that did a really good job with the client experience side and just did like a crap job on the employee side and just didn't realize the disconnect between those two?
What I actually found, John, was that employee experience and customer experience are two sides of the same coin. If you have a great customer experience, chances are pretty likely that you have a great employee experience as well, because it's tough to deliver that remarkable experience for your customers if your employees aren't happy, if they're not enjoying coming to work. And so what I actually found in some ways was the inverse of that. I found a lot of companies that were having a really bad customer experience. And when I started working with their teams as a consultant, I was like, no wonder you have a miserable customer experience. People hate coming to work here. They don't feel supported. They don't feel encouraged. They're not engaged. They don't feel empowered. We need to
And how can they possibly motivate to get excited about serving a client if they're feeling resentful that their employer doesn't have their back or isn't supporting them, that sort of thing?
John, 100%. Yeah. And what we find is that there's a kind of a snowballing effect here, that as the employee experience gets worse and the employees are unhappy coming to work, then when they do interact with the customers, they're complaining and they're surly and they're just, not really enjoying it, which makes the customers more irritable. And then those customers continue to talk to other employees at the organization. And it just becomes this spiraling adventure, which has not a positive outcome at the end, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And so at what point did you realize that you could take this methodology, which I assume when you developed the first 100 days methodology, that you weren't thinking of applying it to employees? At what point did you think, like, I don't need to come up with a whole new set of factors or set of principles. I can take what I built before and apply it?
Well, John, as a pattern recognizer, something I kind of pride myself on and tried to do, I had hoped that I might be able to apply it. Not for the least of which reasons is the selfish understanding of, gosh, I already know how to speak on these phases in this first 100 days. And it's like, if this works in the employee realm, that could be really interesting. And I started doing research and I started looking at studies and I started trying to figure out what was going on the employee side. And what I found, and you alluded to this earlier, is in the customer space, somewhere between 20 and 70% of new customers will quit doing business with you before the 100-day anniversary. And that was staggering to me on the customer side. It's the place where I started my research on the employee side. And I was like, how quickly do employees quit? And what I found is it's almost eerie, the parallel that it's, again, about 20 to 70% of new hired employees will quit before they've been there 3 months, before the 100-day anniversary. And I thought, well, if they're quitting at the same rate and at the same volumes, and this is such a crisis that many organizations are dealing with, but not really talking about, I wonder if the methodologies and the frameworks and the philosophies I adopted on the customer side would work over on the employee side. And not only was I pleasantly surprised that they did, but when I started doing the research, I was able to identify dozens of companies who said to me, yeah, Joey, so we read your first book and it was great for the customers, but to be honest, we kind of broke the rules. We applied it to our employees too, and it's worked incredibly well. So I actually had people that were applying this methodology and this framework before I had even thought about writing the book. And they had case studies and examples and data that we could look to. And I was like, all right, this works in the real world. And that allowed us to kind of flourish from there.
So we're recording this in August of 2023. It's been a couple of years now. People have been talking about the great,
the great resignation.
Great resignation,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And people leaving, and after COVID,
quiet quitting, all of these lovely little phrases.
Terms.
Yeah, it's cute,
but cute to some people.
I'm definitely being facetious when I say that, because people are like, oh my gosh, it's a nightmare out there. And you're trying to coin it into this cutesy phrase to make me feel better about the situation.
Right, exactly. And but all those things are relatively new. And what's really interesting to me is that you actually had the idea of doing this book and started working on this book before COVID happened. And then wisely, when COVID hit, you said, you know what, this is really, there could be some repercussions here this could really change the world of work. And so you actually put a pause on it, which is a good thing you did, because I imagine, if you'd written this book and completed it in February 2020, you probably would have had a lot of stuff to throw out.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I try to do in all of my work, John, is to think as evergreen as possible, to write about first principles, to write about things that will work regardless of whether you're a product business or a service business, an online business or an offline or a hybrid, domestic or international, small, medium, or large. And you're right. I started working on this book and doing the research and speaking about it and thinking about it before COVID. And I actually signed the deal with my publisher to do the book before then. And when COVID suddenly geared up, I reached out and I said, guys, we have to pump the brakes here, because my instinct is telling me that the world of work as we know it is about to change. And, at the risk of sounding, egotistical or prescient in that, I think many people were having that realization at the same time, not just me. And boy, did we ever. I would posit that the landscape shift we have seen in the world of work since COVID, during COVID, and in the year and a half ish since then, is the greatest shift in workplace environment and in the world of work and employees that we've seen on planet Earth ever.
I mean so many. And you and I were just talking beforehand about the changes since the last time we spoke. And, you moved from Colorado to Iowa and then to Minnesota, and like that's geographic. That's one of the big changes, is that so many people now either can work from wherever, or they've made major life changes so that they've decided that they're going to move somewhere else because of the experience we've all been through.
100%. And I think, John, the nuance in there, at least for me, is not only have they realized that they could move and work remotely or work from a different geography, but the employers have realized this too. And while many of the employers are not as excited about this shift as the employees, the genie's out of the bottle. Like you're not getting back in. And I was just involved in a conversation last week with a bunch of CEOs that were talking about their, and I'm quoting directly, their return to work mandates of getting people to come back to the office. And I was like, hey guys, just if I may, and I say guys because it was all guys, right? This was all mostly 60 plus males who were kind of advocating this thought. And I said, a couple of things we want to consider about our nomenclature. Number one, return to work. These people have been working this whole time. Like, I know you might have a skewed, nobody's been on vacation. These people have been working. And a mandate? Is that really the way we want to approach this? Because I think we've gotten, at the risk of getting me riled up and, alienating any of the listeners, I think we've gotten to this point where we've got a certain subset of society that's like, I want it to get back to the way it was, the good old days. And I'm like, the good old days weren't that good. They weren't that great. Like, there weren't a lot of people back in 2019 that were going, can't wait to go into the office today. I mean, there were some, but that was not the majority of workers. So what makes you think in 2023, they're going to be super excited to be back in the office, especially because most organizations haven't taken any steps to make it more appealing to be in the office than it is to be at home. One of the most staggering stats I came across when working on the book is it is estimated that over 30% of Americans were super commuters before COVID. And a super commuter is defined as someone who travels more than 90 minutes to work.
That's crazy.
To and from work. What? This, just think about the days that we have given back to employees by allowing them to work from home. And all the research shows working from home or working remotely, better productivity, better efficiency, higher levels of engagement. Even if that means, they're also doing the laundry and other stuff, better financial standing, more work-life balance. People as a general rule feel better about work when they don't have to spend a significant portion of their day in the car or on mass transit commuting to the office.
So let me be a devil's advocate here, because I'm sure you got pushback from this group of old white men that you were talking to. imagine someone were like, yeah, but Joey, my business is unique. We need to have people in the office for XYZ reason. My company, we're fully remote. So I get it. I mean, I love it actually. And I see the engagement with our team. They're happy to be working from their hometown. They're happy to have the flexibility. But for those who pushed back and said for XYZ reason, we need to have people in the office, what did you say to them?
Well, John, I'm still waiting for an XYZ reason that's based on data. I've heard lots of XYZ reasons that are based on emotion. And I don't mean to denigrate emotion. That's an important thing we want to take into consideration. But so many of them were like, well, because our people just aren't as engaged. And I'm like, okay, what evidence do you have of that? Well, they're not. Like, great. So I'm a recovering attorney. And as I know you are, in my world is if you want to advocate for a position, I will believe your position more if you can bring some evidence to the table. Surveys, proof points, any type of data you've been tracking, any type of evidence that might indicate that this position you're advocating is based in reality, not based in emotion. And suddenly it gets real quiet. Nobody wants to have those conversations. So yeah. Are there certain things? Here's the counterbalance to all of this. Do I think it's enough to let everybody stay at home and never interact with their coworkers and their colleagues again? No. Please don't misunderstand me, anybody who's joining us for the conversation today. What I am saying is we don't need to be in the office every single day. And if we are going to be in the office, we should have a reason for being in the office other than for the senior leadership team to be able to look out across a room of cubicles and go, oh, these people work for me, right? There needs to be something there. And I hear people say, oh, well, collaboration is so much better in the office than it is when people are at home. What's your data? Because the research actually shows that there's a significant percentage of your employees that feel more comfortable sharing their perspective or sharing their ideas in a remote setting than when on in the boardroom with the same other people.
Yeah.
The collaboration that has occurred asynchronously because of online and being able to chase the sun in different time zones ends up being significantly better than this idea of fixed collaboration of we're going to have a meeting in conference room C for an hour with a whiteboard and we'll come out with our vision for next year. It's like, I understand the appeal of having people physically around each other, but the research seems to show that it's just as valuable, if not more, to acknowledge what the employees want and give them what they need in their lives to increase their engagement and increase their connection to work.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I do want to ask you about this idea of the first 100 days, which you've applied to the concept of employees. You're a big fan of giving people a great first day and first week and first month and all that kind of stuff. So talk a little bit about the way that you apply these principles to the employees' experience when they start with a new organization.
Well, John, the first thing I like to do is just ask leaders to think about how much time are you spending onboarding your employees currently? Let's just start there. Because in most organizations, what they're actually doing is orientation, not onboarding. So orientation is things like, hey, this is where we work and this is where you go for lunch. And if you have to go to the bathroom, here's where the bathrooms are. And if there's a fire, here's where the fire extinguisher is. The interesting thing about that is you get that same type of a briefing if you went on a cruise, right? They tell you, here's where you
your
get
muster
food.
station.
Here's the bathroom. Here's your muster station. All of those things, right? Onboarding is a much more systemic, much more robust and designed way to bring people into your organizational operations and culture. So I define onboarding as inviting in new employees using a managed, structured series of contacts that are designed to create a warm, welcoming experience. It's an invitation. It's not a training. It's a managed, structured series of contacts and interactions that happen over the course of weeks and months. Not, hey, we've got a big agenda for day one, and then guess what? On day two, just go do the job. It's like, we can't expect, if you want your people to stay for years, you have to be willing to train them for longer than hours. Okay? Like it's that simple. And so I would be willing to bet that everybody listening, if I were to say, who in your company is responsible for day one of a new employee's experience? There'd be a lot of your listeners and viewers who would say, oh, that would be Jane. That would be Juan. That would be Elisa, whoever it is. Great. Who's responsible for day 2 and day 4 and day 12 and day 13 and day 79? When we start to think about the longer investment of making someone feel part of our culture, making sure they understand their roles, their responsibilities, the requirements of their job, their relationships they're responsible for managing, it's a lot more of an amorphous answer where we're really just kind of pushing employees into the deep end of our pool and saying, hey, good luck swimming. You've swum before, just figure it out. Mm-hmm. Not really an effective way to get the results we want.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the things I love about the book is that you didn't just stick to the big case studies, because it's very easy to say like, well, Apple does this and Google does that. You actually picked case studies from all over the globe, different continents, and different size companies too. So I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of like, pick out any of the examples of some of these companies that are doing it well.
Yeah, well, at the risk of kind of once again referring back to our former legal days, John, my theory is whenever someone reads a book, or I know at least I have this experience when I read a business book, one of the things that the skeptical mind does is say, well, sure, that worked for that case study, but they're different than me. They have more money. They have more people. They have a bigger footprint. They're in tech. I'm in manufacturing. We come up with all of these reasons why this example of how we could do it won't fit to us, isn't, in our world, isn't going to be able to be applied. And so what I start the book out with is a chart that shows all of the 50 plus case studies in the book. And you're right, we have a case study from all 7 continents. I think I may be the first business book in the history of the world to have a case study from all 7 continents. I'm not sure, folks at Guinness, if you're listening and want to have a conversation, I'd be thrilled to. We haven't been able to figure this out, although we've done a lot of research trying to find it. But over 50% of the case studies in the book are from companies with less than 100 employees. And the reason for that is because over 90% of the companies on the planet have less than 100 employees. So I wanted to at least have a contextualization of the conversation that somebody could say, oh, well, that example is kind of similar to me. So maybe it'll be okay. And maybe I'll be able to apply some of those things. As far as the specific example, one that I think is worth considering right out of the blocks is a company called Well-Oiled Operations. Now, their name alone kind of implies that we should maybe pay attention to what they're doing.
Setting the bar high.
Right? Yeah, exactly. We're like, all right, let's see if we can do this. But what I love about what they do is it speaks directly to the number one reason employees leave. Now, John, if I were to ask you or any of the listeners or the typical business leader, why do employees leave? What do you think the most common answer I would hear is? Why do you think employees are quitting? Why are they leaving?
I think I've read that it oftentimes has to do with who they report to, the manager.
Right. Their experience, right? Their experience with the direct person they work to. You're absolutely right. As a general rule, that's kind of the number 2 biggest reason, right? What I hear a lot is more money. Well, they're going to get paid more money somewhere else. So they quit and they went to there. That is also a reason why people leave, but it's only about 9%. The number one reason that employees quit is they don't see a clear career path forward for them in your organization. They're like, hey, I'm doing a good job, but how am I going to be promoted? What's the next job? Where's my growth model in this organization? And what I love about what Well-Oiled Operations does is they address that head on. They've got about 15 employees. So anybody listening, this is a small company, about 15 employees. And every year, the CEO, Stacy Tuschl, gets the whole team together for the annual retreat. Now, a lot of companies do that. They get everybody together for an annual meeting. And she presents the vision of where the company is going that year and kind of what their 3-year goals are. Again, fairly common for businesses, especially by the time you're up to about 15 or to 20 employees. You're starting to think a little more strategically. It's not just putting out fires and do we have enough money to keep in business? There's a little more of a vision to it. But where she does something really unique that I think every business owner listening, every team leader listening could apply in your business with less than an hour of work and no dollars of implementation, is to come up with a future org chart. So what she does is she creates the organizational chart for the company as she envisions it 3 years from now.
Mm.
Now, many of those roles, they don't have anyone currently working in that role, and they're not going to have anyone currently working in that role for another year or two, or maybe even 3. But she maps it out visually and she shares it with the whole team. And then what she says is, by the way, if you see a position that you're interested in, come let your direct manager know, come let me know, because we want to start making sure you have the skills and the training and the understanding to be able to take over that role in 3 years or 2 years or a year, whenever it's ready. This changes the conversation dramatically. Now we're not having a conversation about, well, will I get a raise next quarter? We're having a conversation with an employee that says, I want to be a product manager in 3 years. Great. Let's build out your skills so that we can, instead of going and looking for someone, promote from within and have you run that division.
Yes, it's fascinating. Such a great idea. I know we're my eyes on the clock. I know we're almost out of time. Any other kind of trends that you're seeing in employee retention that's working well these days, or that you kind of got your eye on?
The big thing that I think is has always worked in employee retention, but is becoming more and more important, I think, with each passing month, if not year, is that we really need to acknowledge that our employees are human beings. I think for all too often, or for far too long, rather, many businesses have seen their human resources or their human capital as cogs in a machine instead of human beings. And because they're humans, we need to acknowledge their personal as much as we acknowledge their professional. Now, I know this is potentially irritating some of the folks listening who are like, Joey, I don't want to have to deal with all their personal stuff. And I get it. But where the trend is going globally is that the companies that will be the employer of choice in the future are the ones that are willing to acknowledge what is going on in their employees' lives between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m., as much as they want to focus on what's going on in their life between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So obviously what I mean by that is, what's their home life like? What are their personal goals? What's their relationship with their spouse, their significant other, their parents, their children, their neighbors, like their hobbies? Where do they like to go on vacation? What do they like to do for fun? All of these types of conversations and considerations are things that the best employers are factoring into their communications with their people and figuring out ways to support and encourage that. Because the more you let your employees bring their humanity to work, the more you celebrate what makes them unique as a human, the more they're able to bring the best version of themselves to your enterprise, which leads to better productivity, better efficiency, better success, better growth, better visioning for your business, as well as their personal life.
So follow-up question on that. So where does the employer draw the line on that? I recall recently was reading about someone they were experiencing a situation where they had a great employee, but the employee's spouse had an addiction issue, and it was starting to affect that employee's work. The employer felt very guilty about it, wanted to support their employee, but they weren't quite sure how to do it. Maybe this is an outsized type of scenario or an unusual type of scenario, but I'm sure that many employers would kind of think, well, geez, if I open that door, if I engage with them, or if I'm talking to employees about their personal life, what are my obligations, and how do I know where I should step in and where I shouldn't?
Yeah, and let's be clear. What are my obligations as an employer? What are my obligations legally? What are my obligations as a human? We could put any number of modifiers on that sentence, and the answer might be slightly different or significantly different. Where I think we should start is recognizing that our employees have things going on in their lives that have the potential to impact how they perform, quote unquote, at work, how they perform in their jobs. And if we start to see things that are happening in their personal life impacting their professional life, there's an opportunity to get curious before we get critical, to ask them, hey, what's going on? You just don't seem yourself. You just don't seem like you're bringing your usual high level of performance and focus and attention to the table. Often, opening that door is enough to have the employee feel like there's a little bit of a pressure release, that they can at least share what's going on in their life. And then we can maybe support them or not in varying degrees. One thing that I will say is I think many employers, and again, check with legal counsel on this, but I'd be willing to have a conversation with your legal counsel if they give an answer that's different than what I'm about to share. Many employers think that, well, John, if I talk to this employee and they want to bring up their spouse's addiction problems and we figure out ways that we can support them with this, then that means I have to go to all of my employees and say, do you have a spouse with an addiction problem? No, you don't.
No.
You absolutely don't need to do that, at least
Yeah.
in any jurisdiction I'm aware of.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I think the question is less about this fear of, well, if I do it for you, I have to do it for everyone, and more about how can you meet each person where they're at. The 20-something who's single, who's fresh out of college, who's working for your business is dealing with very different issues in their personal life than the 54-year-old with 4 kids and a mortgage that is dealing with. And neither of them are good or bad. It's just we need to acknowledge they have different wants, different needs, different desires, different challenges in their personal life. And wherever we can kind of meet them where they're at, those employees will value the relationship more.
It's interesting how frequently this can come up. This literally came up in our company recently where we had a team member who said kind of suddenly that they couldn't work for us anymore. They had to leave. And I had a conversation with one of our team members, a manager who I said, well, we should find out what's going on. Is there a way that we can help? Is there some way that we can support them in some way that will allow them to continue to put food on the table for their family by continuing to work while also meeting whatever their needs are? And I got a little bit of pushback from that manager who said, oh, well, I don't feel like we should pry, or I don't want to step over the line. So I think there's sometimes that kind of tension where people are like, well, I don't want to, there's some kind of boundary that I can't cross.
Yeah. And I think let's be clear, there are boundaries that you not only shouldn't cross socially, but you shouldn't cross legally, right? You can't say to the person who you're interviewing, hey, do you plan to have children in the future? There are rules against this that we want to do. I think what your example speaks to, John, and this is not a criticism of either you or the manager, but digging into these topics in a time of crisis or in a time of forced urgency, like the employee saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. If we can have these conversations earlier, if we can create a culture earlier that explores, hey, so tell me something that's really awesome about your life outside of work. And that's it. Not like, hey, are you in a relationship or do you have kids? Just what's something about your personal life that you're really excited about right now? And maybe when you bring everybody in for a meeting on Monday and you kind of have your kickoff meeting for the week, start by going around the room and saying, hey, what's one thing you did this weekend that lit you up? What's one thing that you did this weekend that made you smile? What's one thing you did this weekend that you think other people in the room might want to consider doing next weekend? And now you're having a conversation about who are you as a human, so that when we do rise to the level of something going on in someone's personal life where they're like, this is going to make it so that I can't work for you anymore. Lots of times, if we get curious in those situations, again, instead of getting critical, they might say, we had a situation recently with a company I advised where they had a similar thing. A longtime client a longtime employee came to them and said, I need to quit. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is out of the blue. What's going on? Help us understand. And they said, my mom's gotten sick and I need to go stay with her for a couple months while she recovers. And they're like, okay, so what do you mean? They're like, well, I need to move across the country to go live with her, so I won't be able to come to the office anymore. And they're like, well, would you be willing to work remotely? And the employee was like, is that even an option? And they're like, we could make it an option if that's helpful. And the employee's like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. I'd love to keep working for you. There's nothing wrong with the work. It's that I have this other responsibility that I need to handle. And in that moment, the CEO came to me and said, Joey, I would have thought that would be something they logically came to, and they would have come with that request instead of come with quitting. And what I tried to explain to the leader is, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs, Entrepreneurs are constantly wondering why the rest of the world doesn't see the world the way they do. This is the nature of being human, and it is exacerbated with entrepreneurs. If you are a business owner or a business leader, you are in the rarefied air of the kind of person that sees the world that way. It doesn't mean your employees can't see it that way. It just means that's often not their opening volley or their usual default. And so we almost might want to think of it as a different language, like translate a little, translate it into their world. Hey, I'm really good at solving problems. If you'd be willing to share some of the problems you're dealing with, I might be able to find a solution that will allow both of us to achieve what we want. You to solve the thing you're dealing with in your personal life, and me to keep you as a valued member of our team because we love what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's often just about having the conversation.
No, that's so well said. And that's exactly what I was thinking in our situation, because we've had other team members where same things come up where they didn't realize that there could be some flexibility and they felt like they had to leave, and we've been able to work things out. So that's such great advice. Joey, Never Lose an Employee Again, The Simple Path to Remarkable Retention is the name of the book. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about you?
So the best place to find the book is anywhere you love books. The book is in hardcover for if you like to write in the margins. There's a Kindle and Nook version if you like to ebook highlight. And if you've liked the sound of my voice in our conversation today, I narrate the audiobook, so I'm happy to read the book to you. The best place to find me online is at joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a baby kangaroo or a 5-year-old, Coleman, Coleman, like the camping equipment, but no relation, joeycoleman.com. You'll find information about my books, my speaking, my workshops, everything there. And I just want to say thanks again for having me on the show. And thanks to everybody who was listening in. I hope you left with at least 1 or 2 ideas that you can apply in your interactions with your team to hopefully create even more remarkable experiences for them.
Joey, thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.